in the early days, our entire transaction and commerce was primarily a system of bartering, right? So, given that there was no kind of common store of value or anything which had a commonly agreed value, in lieu of that, we simply just had to kind of accept bartering, right? So, for example, if I wanted a loaf of bread, you may say, I'll give you a chicken, or vice versa. And that was essentially how commerce took place. Now, as you can visualize, given the lack of any standard value, obviously the situation, I can see it would have had several issues, right? Of course, I'm sure there were loads of disagreements as to how much this chicken was worth, whether was it worth one bread loaf or two bread loaves, etc. And in essence, I think that was essentially probably the largest problem during that era for bartering, right? So I think us as a human civilization, what we then spent a long time is to kind of find objects or assets that we as entire civilization could then kind of unanimously agree that it had X value, and then use that as a basis of kind of any other future commerce. Along that path, we as a civilization did come across several metals to begin with, right? So I think that's where the early days, we as a human civilization, we first came across bronze, nickel, copper, and I think we tried evaluating several of these objects, but of course, because of the widely found and the ease of ability of all these metals, none of them ever truly stood that kind of test of time, until of course we reached a today very widely known metal, of course, that's gold. So I think that was a kind of turning point in the human civilization. So in this kind of example, these five people, they hypothetically they come across this metal called gold, right? And I think when we look at what were the main kind of factors they were looking, it's not so different from today, right? So at the end of the day, you're looking for something that was fairly very scarce in terms of absolute value, right? It was not easy to find gold at all. It was something that everybody believed had innate value, meaning you could build things out of it, you could build jewelry, and so it was something that people aspired for, right? So I think these two things alone made gold a fairly good kind of mode of, or a vehicle for commerce, right? So, but of course, that then led to its own kind of set of problems, right? So obviously, when you think about it, me and you, let's say I want a slice of a loaf of bread, maybe you want something else, and then now, even though we both have probably have some kind of common agreement of what gold is worth, you have this problem of divisibility, right? Because as we all know, gold is traditionally a hard metal, right? And it's not easily divisible. So I think what we quickly found out as human civilization was that there was an actual divisibility problem, right? So coming back to our hypothetical example of five people, I think it's easy for the audience to just imagine this world where you've got five people, you've got this large boulder of gold, right? It's like the size of let's say it's just super heavy for any one person to lift. And then now you've got all these five people, and then now you've kind of figured out how much gold each person owns, right? And I think that's where it kind of all starts, right? So you kind of first come start with this assumption of how much value do I actually have. So that's basically dividing that share of gold between the 5 or 10 people that existed. But then you quickly, as you realize that you have this same divisibility problem, not just for commerce, but also in just a pure attribution, right? How does one keep track of how much gold you still have, especially once you begin to do actual commerce, right? And I think that's where we had another problem. There was this issue where you can clearly see that once you start trading commerce and you've got this physical gold, how does one then adjust the balances and keep track of this entire ecosystem? And I think this is where we come back to the central topic that I think is really interesting, especially in the world of blockchain, and this is about trust, right? And I'm sure you've heard of people continuously talking about decentralized trust, blockchain trust, but I think this is that most basic version of trust, and in a very crude way, right? You've got five people, you've all agreed that you got gold, it's a fixed stone. But then now, who do you trust upon to be that gold bearer, right? Obviously, if five people are known people, it doesn't make sense to trust that one person because he may have a bias towards another party. So, and another crude assumption that we'll take is, to solve this problem, and it makes sense. Uh, this is why, maybe at least at that time, these five people then looked for an external solution, because you couldn't obviously trust those within your circle. So you needed to find this kind of third party or someone external to all of you, who had no kind of bias towards any one party, and someone that everybody within that ecosystem would trust, that they would maintain the appropriate balances without kind of doing any kind of malpractice, right? And I think it is that third party that we today commonly referred to as kind of banking institutions. And of course, in their early days, they were nothing like what we see today. But I think that is the fundamental kind of ground level understanding of why how we progressed from this kind of bartering ecosystem to finding a physical store of value, to then having this kind of divisibility problem, and then needing, because you're having this divisibility problem, you then needed someone else to kind of store that asset, to maintain a trust. And then now the question of trust comes up, right? So, and that's why you needed this external third party, so that everybody would maintain trust in them. And I think that's the kind of centrality of this entire blockchain, and the relationship between money and how banks came about into existence. So I think we're back in a point in time now where I think we as a civilization are really ready for kind of adopting a newer based technology paradigm, right? And before we get into modern day crypto and all of that, I think right now is a good time to just ask yourself, if you had to build something ground up, knowing this kind of thesis, what would the kind of fundamental characteristics of this technology solution look like, right? So obviously, we've talked about whatever that solution is needing a kind of base inherent value, right? So it's got to, in some form or way, be kind of digitalized gold or something that can store value. The second is, you also want it to mimic these same characteristics of today's bank-based notes, which is that you want it to be easily divisible. You also want it to be easily something that you can transact across digital networks and internet, right? So obviously, in today's pervasive world, we're not just looking to transact with people who are sitting in our vicinity, but also people across digital worlds, geographies, boundaries. And hence, if you had to build a kind of new age system, you would want that system to be easily kind of transferable across the internet to mimic all the other things, and especially information, right? Today, when we send emails, we can send an email to anybody else. And so I think money should also be like that in this kind of world that we're moving to. What I wanted our users to understand is why Bitcoin fits this thesis, right? So when we now look at Bitcoin, and if we then match that with the set characteristics that we wanted in that system, right? You want a system that is got this kind of fixed scarcity, right? So, and Bitcoin does that. You've got a fixed supply for Bitcoin. You then have the second criteria, which is that it should move across the internet. Bitcoin satisfies that as well. It's a digital native, so it can be sent across networks. People can transact freely. The third is, you don't want any one person controlling it. It also ticks that box. So the nature of how, we won't go too much into the depths of how that works, but I think fundamentally the way the Bitcoin system is architected is such that no one person can alter the rules of how Bitcoin works, or how many Bitcoins are produced, and so on and so forth. So that is the element that gives us that trust without needing to actually have another person. And here the trust is basically given by, in lieu of a person or institution, we are actually relying here on software, right? And that is, I think, the key advancement that we should understand, is that we've moved away from relying on humans and systems, and moved to relying on something that's extremely transparent and repeatable, and that's software, right? And of course, this particular software is a software that once launched cannot be changed by any one person, and hence it gives that extreme level of trust that we've been kind of seeking. The fourth part of it is, now how do we solve that last part, which is how do you now get people to want to perform these checks and validations, and to basically ensure that the network continues running, right? All the infrastructure related stuff. How do you ensure that people contribute to the network and ensure that the network is running smooth, right? And I think this is the fundamental kind of last piece that I'd like users to understand. It is only due to this fundamental reason that we need to incentivize someone who may not have any vested interest in this underlying currency. In order to incentivize them is why we have something in this kind of Bitcoin network called as mining rewards, right? So I know we've digressed a little bit from fairly a philosophical subject and now dived into mining rewards, but I think it is important to understand why systems like Bitcoin even have a mining network, right? It is solely so that it can act as an incentive for someone who may not have any actual affiliation with the network, right? No one really wakes up in the morning thinking I'm gonna work towards the Bitcoin network, right? It's rather, it is that innate incentive that the Bitcoin network pays you in the form of Bitcoins itself that makes someone want to be part of the mining network, which is essentially the equivalent of a bank running a software validating job on the networks, right? So it's almost like there is no need for you to participate, but if you do participate, you get paid a reward, and hence you find more and more people wanting to participate. So I think this is why it is this fundamental incentivization layer that is what has ensured that today Bitcoin remains a very widely accepted and very decentralized network, right? It's because it's been able to incentivize people from random walks of life, occupation, location, geography, and all of them are incentivized by just one thing, and that is the fact that you earn a reward from the Bitcoin network, and that reward is again based on a logic that cannot be changed and everybody can trust, right? So I think that is the centrality to why the Bitcoin network was looked at as a kind of fundamentally game-changing innovation, right? It introduced this paradigm of how you can build trust in an online world using a digital currency, and these kind of frameworks of how you bring about these incentivization networks and so on and so forth. Yeah.